Cross My Heart Ministry. Laura McFarland here. Since it's the month of March, we're bringing you a St. Patrick's Day edition of Martha Monday. I've got on my green sweater to commemorate today and this month. And you know, when you think about St. Patrick's Day, what comes to mind? Probably little leprechauns with those green hats, or maybe a shamrock, or putting green into your drink, or I think there are some cities where they put green in the water and you have a green river flowing through that day. Maybe you think about wearing green so you don't get pinched. But today I'm going to bring a green recipe for you today. It's an old favorite from our family that my mom has been making for years and years and years. I have no idea where it first came from, but it's absolutely delicious. It's called Million Dollar Dessert. If you grew up like I did, going to church potluck dinners, or having, as my grandmother used to call it, a homecoming dinner, where all the people that used to go to the church would have their kids and grandkids come back and they'd have dinner out on the grounds, there was always something similar to Million Dollar Dessert that would show up. So this is a recipe that uses pudding in its base, and so in honor of St. Patrick's Day, I'm using pistachio. My mom loved to make it with pistachio pudding. It gives it that green flavor and green look for St. Patrick's Day. But you could also use chocolate or butterscotch. I saw banana pudding when I went to buy mine at the grocery store. So you just decide what flavor you might like. But if you're making it for St. Patrick's Day, this is what you want to use, pistachio. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I always like to cook with my apron on because I can be a little messy, and I certainly don't want to get my green sweater messy today. So if you're a regular subscriber, you know that once a month we get into the kitchen, we bring you a recipe, maybe we're someplace in the house with an organizational tip. Last month or so, we published a video on cleaning out your washer, how to give your washer a good clean, and that was a popular one, and many of you expressed appreciation for that. Another one was a taco soup, so you can go back and look at some of those. But Cross My Heart primarily exists to encourage women to love God and love His Word. So on Fridays, you're going to find a teaching that's based upon the Word of God. And I hope you'll come back and take a look at those as well. But today, instead of being a Mary at the feet of Jesus, we're that Sister Martha getting in the kitchen and whipping up something yummy and sweet today. So this recipe calls for preheating the oven, first of all, to 350 degrees. Let me get that going. I always cook with my oven on convection, and it automatically makes that adjustment. And so we're going to do that. I'm going to spray my 9.5 by 11 baking pan with cooking spray so that we don't want it to stick. This recipe is interesting because it goes on in layers, and all the layers make it so yummy. So it's also a recipe that some woman wrote and was very clever, because you get to work smarter instead of harder. Rather than dirtying up another bowl and melting your butter in that and mixing everything, you just mix the base right in the pan. So I am going to put a stick of butter, which is the first item on the list, my butter. I've had it out for a little bit, so hopefully it's getting soft. But while the oven is preheating, we're just not going to waste that heat in the oven. We're going to let the oven go ahead and melt that butter for us. And after that's melted, we're going to pull it out. I'm going to go ahead and get out my little hot pad here so I can put my pan on there and not on my counter. And then we're going to be mixing in 1 cup of flour and half of a cup of chopped walnuts. And that's all that goes in the base. We're just going to mix all that together right in the pan. Got my wooden spoon already. Then we're going to just spread that out, pat it out. It's going to go back in the oven and bake, let me see, for 15 minutes. And so it's going to bake for 15 minutes, and then we have to let it sit until it's completely cool. So this is a video where you're going to see me do something, and then the video is going to have a little stop, and we're going to move forward and do the next layer and the next layer. So the first is just the 3 ingredients in the base: the butter, the flour, and the nuts. So while we're waiting on the butter to melt, I thought I would just give you a little bit of insight about St. Patrick. I don't know if you've ever wondered about him with the saint before his name. You've probably guessed that he's a patron saint of the Catholic Church, but who was he? Was he a real person? Do you know anything about him? And so I just did a little research that I thought I would share with you so that we transformed this waiting time into some learning time. So he was born in the late 4th century, and of course that was the time when Rome ruled the world. His parents were citizens of Rome, but Rome by that time had reached to the far north, and he lived in the northern part of the Roman community, the Roman civilization, and he was born or lived in, most people say northern England, but I was interested as a McFarlane and a Scottish girl that a lot of the records say that he was from Scotland. So whether it was southern Scotland, northern England, I like to think Scotland because I think there's a lot of irony to that. It makes it more interesting, it makes a more interesting story because the Scots and the Irish were always kind of battling. You hear that Mick or that Mac and you think, which is it? So as a McFarlane girl, talking today about this man who was the patron saint to Ireland, who was born in England or Scotland, it's just kind of interesting. So he was born in England, northern England or Scotland, and as a young man in his mid-teens, he was captured. You know, that was the era where there were all these pirates coming in and they would take slaves and cart them off. The Romans did that too, of course. But some pirates came from Ireland and they raided his village. He was taken captive and hauled over to Ireland, where he served as a laboring farmer, whatever. And that was a difficult time for this young man, away from home and forced to work. But the roots of his faith grew stronger. And isn't that often the case for us? That when we go through hard things and difficulties, that's where what we really believe gets settled down deep into our hearts, and our faith sustains us. We've heard story after story in modern times about prisoners of war who had a bit of scripture in their minds, and that sustained them, or maybe they actually were able to get a hold of a real Bible. Well, St. Patrick's faith was sustained during that time, and he during that time in Ireland, the country was ruled by these Celtic chieftains, and they were influenced by the Druids, the advice and counsel that these polytheistic Druids, it was just an oppressive, dark place spiritually. And so he learned about all the ways of life that the Celts lived and about what the Druids taught. And those years as a slave, he just saw a real stark contrast between what he believed as a follower of the true living God and his faith in God and what he was seeing there before him. And he wrote this, and this is a direct quote that's been recorded from him. He says, "I prayed frequently during the day. More and more the love of God increased, and my sense of awe before God. Faith grew, and my spirit was moved, so that in one day I would pray up to 100 times, and at night perhaps the same." Can you and I imagine praying more than 100 times during the day and 100 times during night? That's what trouble and conflict does. That's what deepens our faith and teaches us how to pray. You talk to any praying person, if you have a godly woman in your life, a godly man in your life, an older, wiser person that just seems to have a deep, profound faith, that person is a person of prayer. And most likely, there have been some hardships in their life or in the lives of their children that have taught them to pray. It's the upside down logic of the gospel that the way up is down, my friend. And so the life of St. Patrick really proves that. He heard God telling him that he was going to go back home. He sensed that. Somehow he was able to escape and get away and made his way to the coast and got a ship, and he did return home. And when he did, he was just wholeheartedly committed to his faith. He'd grown so much spiritually during his time of captivity. He came, devoted himself to the faith. He studied. He was ordained as a priest. He became a bishop. And he also became convinced of all things that God wanted him to return back to the land of the captivity. He was back home safe with his family and everything familiar, back home in England or Scotland. But God said, "I want you to go back." And so in obedience to God's leading, he left all the safety and comfort of home and he went back. And because he had been there before, he knew the language. He was familiar with the customs. And he had an advantage over others that had tried to go there before to evangelize the Irish and the Celts at that time because of his captivity. Our great God doesn't waste anything. He recycles even the hard things and uses those things for his glory. And I think that's what happened in the life of St. Patrick. He wasn't the first to bring Christianity there, but God used him to convert thousands of men and women in small outlying areas as he traveled all over Ireland sharing the gospel. He stayed there for decades. He traveled, he was determined, he was unrelenting as he shared the gospel, and a lot of people there rejected all those ancient practices, all that polytheistic worship, and they embraced Christianity in worship of the true God, and found that salvation was found in the person of Jesus Christ. He ordained priests and found leaders to lead the communities of converts that were formed because of the places that he had traveled. I just picture Patrick as being sort of a Paul to the people in Ireland, this evangelist that shared the gospel there. He encountered, of course, a lot of resistance, a lot of danger, as there always is when dark practices are firmly entrenched. But I have one more quote from you. He said, "If I be worthy, I am ready even to give up my life most willingly here and now for his name. It is there that I wish to spend my life until I die, if the Lord should grant it to me." This man followed so closely on the heels of Jesus that he gave up his life and was willing to die physically, had a lot of struggle and hardship, but he knew he was completing the work that God had given him to do. You know, we often see a shamrock on lots of things during St. Patrick's Day, and legend tells us that St. Patrick would use a shamrock. He would pick up that little clover with the 3 leaves, and he used that to explain the Trinity and to talk about God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. So when you're putting out your St. Patrick's Day decor, even if you're not of the Catholic faith, even if you're a Protestant, or even if you're nothing, I hope that just seeing the shamrock will prompt you to think about the God who's created the universe, the Son that was sent to die for us, and the Holy Spirit that comes to indwell all of us who have committed our lives to Jesus Christ. We celebrate St. Patrick's Day on March 17th because that is traditionally accepted as the day of St. Patrick's death. And what a man who went off to receive his eternal reward. And so now, for those of you that remember Paul Harvey, I'll just say that's the rest of the story if you've ever wondered about St. Patrick. Let's see how our butter is doing. It's just about melted. In fact, I think I can probably stir it around enough and make it work. Let's see. I talked long enough that we got our butter good and melted. Let's just see. I think I'm going to kind of break it up a little bit. My husband, the mechanical engineer, would say that's a principle of heat transfer. When you take a mass and divide it a little bit and it melts quicker, but we women just know it works, so we don't have to have a name for it or a principle to apply to it. Just going to stir it around there just a little bit. I want it to be completely melted before I start mixing it in. And I am going to stick it back in there for just another minute or so. Now, I will go ahead and tell you while we're waiting that I printed it out only on my black and white computer. I think the real copy has a little bit of color to it. But as is always the case with all of our recipes, in the notes below this video, there's a link that you can download your very own copy. Let me also just note, while I've got a couple of extra minutes, that the recipe calls for a large box of pistachio pudding. Maybe your grocery store carries that. I could not find it in mine. And so when you go to find pistachio or whatever pudding, if you can't find the large box of the flavor you want, 2 small boxes will suffice. And I even called my mom to make sure that that's what she uses, because this is indeed her recipe. So we're going to go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and measure out, get my flour ready. We need 1 cup of flour, so I'm just going to go ahead and get that a little bit ready to go here and have it standing here and ready. And then I'm guessing that my butter is probably melted by this time. And it is. Leave my mitts there out of the way. Now I am going to use my mixer for the filling, but for this part of the base, I'm just going to mix everything right here in our pan. It makes it so easy. Move this out of the way. It's kind of clear, so I'm just going to sprinkle my flour in. And Give this a little bit of a mix. You just want to mix until the butter is completely absorbed. And then I'm going to, in just a moment, add my 1/2 cup of walnuts. I keep my walnuts and all of my nuts actually that I'm not using in the freezer just to keep them fresh. There's nothing worse than stale walnuts in your oatmeal or in any recipe for that matter, but I like to buy them in bulk at Sam's or wherever you can find them in bulk because they've gotten so expensive. And so my big Sam size version is kept in my freezer, but then I just open it up and take out what I need when it's time. So, okay, so we're just going to get this all mixed up. Goes together pretty quick. And then we're going to spread it out. It almost doesn't feel like there's enough flour to really make a good base, but it just spreads out and we make it kind of work. And so I'll probably end up needing to get my fingers in here a little bit. Always don't like to do that on screen, but this is kind of what you do. It's hot, but it's just okay. So I'll show you what it looks like in just a moment. You may see a little bit of the glass on the bottom peeking through, but it will be okay. It'll all spread out as it's baked. It just makes a nice little thin layer. So again, this is going to bake. We're going to let it cool completely, and then we'll go on to that next layer while we're waiting for it to cool. So this is a recipe that you're going to want to do the night before because you want it to be nice and cold, of course, when you take it to your church potluck or to your small group or what have you. I was thinking about it today with being an empty nester now, and if I make this for Kevin and me, there's just not enough days for us to eat this much dessert. But if I get a hankering for $1 million dessert, I think what I would probably do is bake it or prepare it, bake it, and then add the other toppings to it and do it in 2 square pans, or one smaller square pan and one kind of small rectangle pan. And then I could share one with a friend and then just have one here for us, or have one to serve if we have friends for dinner or something like that. So if you're thinking the same thing as me, oh, I'd love to try it, but what would I do with it all? And then you can always run to the dollar store and find those little disposable pans and maybe just take some and just give it away and not have to worry about getting your pan back. Now, when I dropped in the nuts, they're kind of in spots where there's more than I want to be there, and then other spots seem to have little bare nutless spots. So I always kind of grab the nuts and move them around a little bit to try to even it out, but it's just okay. You just want every bite to have a little bit of nut in it. So I've got a wet rag here to sort of clean up my hands. Let me put on my mitt and let you see a little bit of what it looks like before we put it in the oven to bake it. And again, it's going to bake for 15 minutes, and it's just going to get sort of light golden brown. So there's kind of what that looks like. I'm going to stick it in the oven, set my timer for 15 minutes. Of course, everybody's oven is a little different, so you're going to want to watch yours. It's just going to be a little light golden brown when it's finished. I'm going to stop the video now. I'm going to let that bake, take it out, let it get completely cool, and then I'll be back to do the next layer in our $1 million dessert. Hey, well, welcome back. We're ready to do layer 2 of our $1 million dessert. It's really not as complicated as it sounds, but it really is actually 4 layers because we divide up the Cool Whip and add Cool Whip as that last 4th layer. I think I said 3 earlier. But everything is now cool here. This is what the base looks like. It's nice and light brown. And again, that was just the flour, the walnuts, and the butter that was melted. Okay, so now we're going to go and do our next layer. And for this, I'm going to use my handy dandy mixer. You can use a hand mixer. You could do it by hand, but because we're putting cream cheese in there, I just like to have it mixed really thoroughly. So this layer includes a cup of powdered sugar, 8 ounces of cream cheese, and then the recipe calls for 8 ounces of Cool Whip, but you do divide that. We're going to put 1 cup of Cool Whip in this layer and then save the rest of the Cool Whip to go on the top later. So now when I'm doing a recipe, I often just use the regular cream cheese. I've never tried this with the lower fat. You can try that if you like, and then let me know what you think. But I figure if I'm going to do dessert, I'm just going to do the whole thing and make it good. And because I'm going to be giving this away I certainly don't want to subject someone else to my testing and my experimenting to see how it might turn out. Now, even though I wasn't raised in the Depression, I'm a girl that always takes a knife and rakes off every little bit, whether it's butter or cream cheese or whatever. Just want to make sure that if my recipe calls for 8 ounces, I don't want to have 1/4 of an ounce getting thrown into the trash can. So that's all here. And because I let this sit out a little bit, I think my cream cheese is going to mix together nicely and quickly. So I'm going to put this in here and give that a little whirl and get that going while I measure out my powdered sugar. So again, 1 cup of this. Make sure, yes, 1 cup. Dig deep in there. And then I always have a little leveler when I'm measuring flour or sugar to kind of even it out. And so there we go. Let me undo that, unlock it. I'm going to dump this in, get that going. And here we go. Let's see if I can just sort of flick the cream cheese without getting my knife involved. There we go. We're going to add to this 1 cup of the Cool Whip. This is just about mixed up nicely. Now, I was talking to a friend about this recipe, and she tells me that, well, she grew up with that same recipe. She had never heard of $1 Million Dessert, but in their family, they called it possum pudding. Possum pudding. And so if you grew up going to your grandma's house and having possum pudding or seeing possum pudding at your church picnic, it's the same recipe maybe. So, or maybe if you've never even heard of this and it's time for you to try something new. So again, this is not frozen. I had it was cool, so it's cold, but not frozen so that I could deal with it. So we're gonna get all that raked out of there. My little handy dandy spatula. And here we go. This is coming together quick. Gonna again save the rest of the Cool Whip to do that on top. Now sometimes if I'm making this and I'm doing chocolate pudding, because who doesn't love chocolate? It's really delicious made with chocolate. Sometimes I'll even take some chocolate chips or some mini chocolate chips and sort of sprinkle those across the top, and that's really yummy. Okay, I think we're just about there. I'm going to take this off and use my spatula and kind of rake down the sides just to be certain that all of the cream cheese is mixed in thoroughly, and give it one more little whirl with the mixer, and then we're going to call it good. We're going to spread this on top. The recipe calls for this to be refrigerated for 30 minutes. I'm usually too impatient to make that happen. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to spread this on top of the crust. I'm going to put it in the refrigerator, and then I'm going to come back, and while that is in the refrigerator for as long as it takes for me to mix up the next layer, that's how much it's going to cool, not the full 30 minutes. So that's just my little tip to save time. That's the way Laura does it. So let's get this out. I'm going to go ahead and use my spatula to clean all the cream cheese off of my little batter. Again, we don't want anything to be washed down the sink that could be eaten or enjoyed. Get that off there as best as we can. Kind of sticky, of course, because it is cream cheese. And you know, any recipe that has cream cheese is always absolutely yummy and delicious. Here we go. So just going to spread this on top. And usually I'll just put a little dollop in the different sections, and it just seems to make it easier to spread it out instead of putting it all in one place. Get it all raked out here. This out. I was even thinking as I was making this that if you really wanted it to be really bright green, this would also be a place that you could put some green food coloring in here with the cream cheese, and then it would really be delightful and fun. If you have kids at home and you want to just really do up St. Patrick's Day good, you can put food coloring in their eggs and then read green eggs and ham that day. You can put green food coloring in their milk. There's just all sorts of fun things that you could do to make it kind of silly and fun and create memories with your kids. That's such a time that is fleeting and goes by so quick. And it always amazes me when I talk to my kids, the things that they remember from their childhood, the things that are funny and the jokes that continue on. They're not usually the things that we think we had to spend a lot of money on to create a memory, but sometimes they're just little silly things. And so putting a little bit of food coloring in their breakfast cereal or in their oatmeal or whatever might be just the fun thing to do. So normally this layer I leave a little bit longer, and because I wanted to get my video finished, I went ahead and did it, and I'm finding that it wasn't quite as cool as I hoped it was cool enough. I pulled it back out, but part of the crust was trying to come up on me. But I'm going to persevere here and get this spread out and make it work. So here we go. Getting it all spread out all the way to the edge here so that we don't see, you know, you've got it all spread out when you no longer see any of the little light brown crust. And that's what I'm trying to do, is get it all the way to the edge. Go, almost there. Have to always get my fingers in it a little bit to get it all where I want it to be. So a little bit of cream cheese in that corner, and voila, I think we are ready to go. I'm going to pop this into the freezer, not in the freezer, I'm going to pop it in the refrigerator, let it cool for 30 minutes or as close to 30 minutes as I can stand. And in the meantime, I'm going to wash my mixer because I need to mix the next layer. And then by the time I get that mixed, this one will be ready to come out. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Okay, we are back to mix up layer number 3. Now, I know that sounds complicated when I talk about layer 2, layer 3, and then layer 4. But really, they all just have a couple of ingredients, and it does go together pretty quickly. So I've got that base crust with the cream cheese layer on top of it in the refrigerator, continuing to cool. Probably not going to leave it there for the full 30 minutes, but we're going to go ahead and mix up the next layer, which is our pudding and our milk. That's all there is to it. I'm using the pistachio again because it is green, and I'm using skim milk. Now, probably it really should be whole or 2% in a recipe, but I don't drink. This is what I like to drink these days in my life, so I'm just going to use the skim milk and hope for the best. Now, I'm saying that after I just told you that I didn't like to buy the cream cheese light for a recipe, but when I use the cream cheese, I use it all in the recipe, and when I use the milk, I'll have some left over, and I want to drink it, and I drink skim. So there's my full disclosure. So we've got the green pistachio pudding. And again, the recipe, when you download that, and again, you can find that link in the notes below. It says 1 large pudding mix. You may have difficulty finding that, and so if you do, just use 2 of the small ones, and it works just fine. I'm using the pistachio in honor of St. Patrick's Day, but again, you can just experiment to your heart's desire and use any flavor of pudding that you like. I'm adding 3 cups of milk here, and so I've got a 4-cup measuring cup, so I can just do it all one time. You always need to get down and look because it always looks different from down low than it does up high. Okay, 3 cups. I'm going to whip this up with my mixer. You want to be sure that the box says instant, because otherwise it's supposed to be cooked. But the instant pudding, boy, you just add that milk and give it a good whip up, and it's going to be nice. Go on that next layer, and here we go. I probably should have gotten my shield a little bit, but we're going to let that go. Going to start to see it mix together. This is where I sort of want to play the Jeopardy theme song while I'm waiting for that to get all nice and mixed up. So the milk is cold when you put it in there, and so we're just going to get this all mixed together. We're beating it together. It will be slightly thick when it's ready. I'm going to move it up a notch. I'm going to get my shield so that I can just do that on high and not worry about that coming out and getting all over me. So there we go. So the faster the beating of the mixer, the faster my pudding is going to get mixed up. And it's starting to get there. It is a pretty green color from the pistachio, so that's going to make it really fun for St. Patrick's Day. I was also thinking that one thing you could do is maybe just do a vanilla pudding and perhaps mix in some mint flavoring, just to give it sort of a, and then add some green food coloring. If you don't care for the pistachio, but you wanted to have the green, I was trying to think of an alternative. And then it might be fun to dice up some Andes mints and sort of sprinkle that on top of the final layer of Cool Whip that goes on top. If you decide to do something different, leave us a note and let us know how you experimented with our $1 million dessert or our possum pudding or whatever you decide to call it at your house. Maybe you'll come up with your own unique name. It's starting to get thick, and whew, it's really too high. It was starting to bounce out of the shield. Okay, so we are going to spread this over the cream cheese layer as soon as I get that out of the fridge. And then the only thing to do is to spread the Cool Whip on top of that, and we are finished. You just refrigerate it until you're ready to serve it. I love the new Pyrex dishes that come with the lid, so you're not messing with that saran wrap or whatever that gets caught up in the Cool Whip that's on top of the recipe. So I think we're just about ready. I'm going to go ahead, run over to my refrigerator and get the dish that's cooling and chilling, and I'll be right back. Okay, and I'm back. I think my cream cheese is chilled and it's getting a little firm, maybe not as firm as I would like, but I think the pudding is just going to spread over top and be just fine. It's all going to get put back in the fridge and chilled nicely anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this now. I want to show you the bright, beautiful green that we see here. You can probably see it on the beaters, but so pretty. And it just looks very fun and festive and very St. Patrick's Day-ish in its color. So there you can see what color the pudding is. I'm just going to sort of spread this out, and it's just amazing what Instant Pudding does. Just comes together nice. Think about the old days before Instant Pudding when our grandmothers had to cook it and do all that. It's just nice that all we need to do is just put it in here and it's ready to go. Let me get all the pudding mix pulled out of here, my spatula. Oops. A little bit more here. Okay, that out of the way. And look at that beautiful, vibrant green. So pretty. Just going to spread this out. It's going to taste absolutely delicious. I can hardly wait to try it. And that certainly spread on a lot easier than the cream cheese layer. So we've got the layer of the crust, we got the cream cheese layer, now we have our pudding layer. And so the only thing left to do now is take the remaining Cool Whip and just put that on top. So we're just going to dollop that on, a little bit here, a little bit there, going all the way around, and make it a little bit easier to spread it if we just put it on here and there. And then just chill it and you are ready to go. It's a great dish to take to a potluck, great dish to take if you sign up to do the dessert portion of a meal, if somebody's had a baby, or if you have to do a funeral meal. It's just, you can scoop out a little bit and still sample something else on the lovely dessert table that always seems to show up when we are at a funeral meal or at a potluck or something like that. So sometimes when everybody makes all these delicious favorites, you just want to take a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And it's hard to take just a little bite of pie. You end up getting a whole slice or just a little bit of cake because you just have to cut the slice. But with a dish like this, you can just take a tablespoon and scoop up a little bit and try it, and then fill up your plate with some other things that you want to sample. So just going to spread this out so that I have all my green covered. And then if you want to get kind of fancy, you can take the back of your spatula and do the little peaks in it, kind of like we used to watch our grandmas do with the custard on top of a pie, where you can just leave it go. But if you want to kind of do this and kind of do the peaks, you can, but usually that's more complicated than I want to get. So I just usually spread it all out to make sure that whatever color of pudding underneath there is covered, and then I know it's nice and even, and we are good to go. I may take a paper towel later and sort of since I'm going to take it and give it away, maybe clean up some of the edges a little bit. But there you go. This is our $1 million dessert. Let me bring it over closer to the camera so you can take a look. Here you go. $1 million dessert. I hope you'll give it a try at your house. For Cross My Heart Ministry, I'm Laurie McFarland.